Digitization of the supply chain. What is it? What's it all about? What are some of the trends? This week, we're going to be talking to an expert in the space, Suuchi Ramesh, and that is coming right up. So digitization of the supply chain, it's been a hot topic for years in supply chain, and I'm very pleased to have with us today Suuchi Ramesh, who runs a company called, funnily enough, Suuchi. So tell us a little bit about digitization in the supply chain, Suuchi. What is it? Why do we need it? What are some of the trends?
Yeah, well, let's start with defining what digitization is, first of all. It's nothing but giving everybody a digital identity and allowing assets to be digitally created, right? So when you're able to convert analog processes and tasks to digital assets, number one, and if you have everyone with a seat at the digital table with their own profile and an ID and login, you've digitized the entire supply chain. So many times if you have a product that allows easy onboarding, it's fairly quick time to market to move from an analog to a digital process just by as a function of giving everybody a digital identity and allowing the ability to create assets digitally. So that's to us what digitization is.
So to ask a really dumb question, because I think some
Please
people
do.
may have this in the back of their mind, that sounds like blockchain.
Well, no, that involves a little bit of a deeper discussion. Blockchain is more the ability to make sure that the transfer of data is, how do you transfer the data? How do you make sure that it's done in a way that data is safe, that it's timestamped? So digitization is a little more basic than that, if you would, right? You could have a product that allows you to digitize that may or may not sit on the blockchain technology, right? Then, because that's a deeper question on how's the data saved, stored, time-stamped. So, but of course, I mean, with the complexity involved with digitization across the supply chain, one can argue that a blockchain technology provides a lot more safety, security, and because of the number of transfer points of the data. So to your second question, what some of the trends are, I'd say the number one trend is just the amount of attention given to the UI and UX of a platform that is trying to get you to digitize. I don't think that digitization is the level of digitization is almost inversely proportional, I'd say, to the age of the product, the software product. And I say that because a lot of the legacy software systems that a lot of companies are using tend to be perpetual licenses. They were really built many years in the past. If you know the version of that product was released 10 years ago or even 8 years ago, the B2B systems built then didn't really overemphasize or over-index for really simple, easy, intuitive UI UX. In fact, I would argue that many of them made it complex on purpose because then the training involved was fairly massive and there was a snooty factor to being able to use these systems. And that's been a huge shift. And a permanent shift, in my opinion, is having a B2C-like interface for these B2B systems. And the simpler it is, the more DIY, the more do-it-yourself, the better the ability to digitize. And so one part of determining whether your digitization strategy is successful is what percentage of all of your participants across your supply chain, across your departments, are able to actually get on the system and use that effortlessly with minimal training. So I'd say that's really one of the key trends. The other is having all of the participants across the supply chain as well as all of the data flow very effectively department to department. So again, if you have an effective platform or connected product suite, digitization then helps you have all these data sets communicate with one another and have the foundation for some very powerful analytics.
Okay, that's a pretty good summary. So what are some of the mistakes that you find people are making in digitization? I imagine some companies sort of get into this space and think, okay, we're going to digitize the supply chain, and they launch into it. I mean, is it a question of picking the right areas, the right sequences? Where do people really get it wrong?
So, yeah, it's a great question. And I think one part, of course, is picking a product with really smart and clean UI and UX. Unfortunately, when people make decisions with products, if you look at a company, you're not making one product, you're making one product decision today, you might make another product decision tomorrow. So what ends up happening is that you have these products that are not talking to one another, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean you haven't invested in products. There are some companies that haven't invested enough money in their tech stack. And then at the other end, you might have companies that have invested in quite a few products, but they have software shock. So I'd say that having a long-term view and really planning to have, when it comes to digitization, having a homogenized front-end view across all these product sets is really important. So that may actually, on the one hand, for some companies involve making new product decisions, but simultaneously, I think it's important to rationalize the software and the systems that you have in your tech stack. And I often like a very simple X by Y graph, and I'll ask you listeners to visualize with me. Let's say the X-axis is the business impact and the Y-axis is the complexity. You want to have products with the highest business impact and the quickest time to value on the Y-axis, and the X-axis, you want to have it with the lowest level of complexity in terms of UI, UX, and the ability to use the system. So the softwares that are at the wrong end, at the worst quadrant, which is high complexity and low business impact, many companies make the mistake of continuing to keep them inside. And even if it's a perpetual license and you've paid for it one and done, you're still paying for the teams that have to stay on to manage the beast. And not to mention that these systems are taking away from your ability to have one version of the truth.
Yeah.
So I'd say one solution to the problem is rationalizing and really cutting the cord with systems that are not adding value. It's a difficult decision to make, but one that's required. And then finding a system that can help you wrap across the supply chain is critical, just because there's so many data sets, and thinking ahead about how do you, with that being a means to the end for analytics. So I'd say these are some of the mistakes: not concentrating enough on the UI UX. The second, not rationalizing the tech stack, and finally, not having a long-term roadmap, both with respect to the tech stack as well as with respect to how do you build out the analytics foundation.
Okay, that sounds great. Just to wrap this, maybe we can kind of summarize this whole conversation on digitization of the supply chain, because there might be people watching this thinking, okay, what's the ROI? What's the benefit? What's the number one benefit, do you think, in digitizing the supply chain?
Is just number one, reducing the costs both above the line as well as below the line. And that comes from when you digitize the entire supply chain, you're able to make smarter assignments to all of your vendors across the entire supply chain as well as to your employees. That directly improves your above the line gross margins. But also you're able to shift away your team's attention, the overhead, which is below the line, I'm talking of the P&L, away from tactical tasks to strategic. So I'd say, you asked me to pick the one. There's many others. There's cultural impacts as well. But the number one is improvements in the profit.
Okay. Maybe just one final question, because we're recording this in January 2021. We've had a very difficult 2020. Do you think this whole period of COVID and the stress it's placed on our supply chains will accelerate the digitization of supply chains? Or I guess putting that another way, companies that have good tech stacks in their supply chains, have they been more resilient, do you think?
Yeah, yes to both, absolutely. The acceleration is already happening, and the cost of repeating a cliche. I think any subject on any discussion on this topic, you hear people say that the 5-year roadmap has been pulled into a 5-month roadmap now. So that's been great to see. That's been one of the benefits of the tragedy that we've gone through as an economy in 2020. And yes, those that have the long-term thinking on their tech stack obviously are more resilient as a function of that. They're better able to withstand these shocks and get stronger as a function of it because they're already prepared.
Okay, that's excellent. Well, thank you, Suuchi. That's a great sort of summary, I think, of the digital supply chain. And thank you all for watching. I would ask you to, if you have any questions or comments, do pop those down below, and maybe I can get Suuchi to answer them because they might be out of my sphere of influence or knowledge. And if you're new to the channel, do think about subscribing. Hit that subscribe button. If you hit the bell, you'll get notified every time we have a new video coming out. And they come out every Tuesday evening, Sydney time. And we might put some links down below, Suuchi, if that's all right, to your business, Suuchi, and maybe even, if you don't mind, to your LinkedIn profile, because I'm sure a lot of people will want to connect there. So thank you very much for joining us. Fascinating conversation. And we might have one more conversation, I think, on this topic, because I'm really interested about the mistakes that people make with their systems. Maybe they'll be coming up next week. So thanks for joining us, Suuchi, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.